Before the stories begin, I would like to thank all of you for clicking on this video. Without the faithful fans, we as creators could not do this. I truly hope you enjoyed the upcoming stories. Please don't forget to like and subscribe for future stories to come.
Into the Wasteland.
Jeff had been a gamer since he was 6 years old. From the days of simple pixelated characters to the lifelike graphics of modern gaming, he had seen and played it all. Now, at 35, his passion for video games had not waned. His weekends were often spent in front of his 75-inch high-definition TV, controller in hand, immersed in digital worlds far more exciting than his mundane job. This particular weekend, Jeff was engrossed in Wasteland Warriors, a post-apocalyptic adventure game known for its gritty realism and challenging survival mechanics. He had been looking forward to this new release for months, and now, finally, he was deep into the game, scavenging for supplies and fending off raiders and mutated creatures. It was late, well past midnight, and Jeff's eyes were starting to blur from hours of staring at the screen. But he was on a mission, a crucial one to secure a rare piece of equipment needed to upgrade his shelter. As he navigated through a dilapidated cityscape, he felt a sudden jolt, as if an electric shock had surged through his body. The screen flashed bright white, and Jeff's vision went black. When he opened his eyes, Jeff found himself lying on the ground, the taste of dust in his mouth. The sun blazed down from a cloudless sky. He groaned and sat up, only to freeze in shock. This wasn't his living room. He was in a wasteland. Ruined buildings and twisted metal structures surrounded him. The air smelled of decay and burnt rubber. Panic set in as Jeff tried to make sense of his situation. Was this a dream? Had he somehow been transported into the game? Jeff pinched himself hard. The sharp pain confirmed that this was no dream. His heart raced as he got to his feet, brushing off the dirt. He was wearing the same outfit his character in Wasteland Warriors wore: combat boots, a one-piece blue jumpsuit, and some leather armor over his shoulders and right forearm. Even his trusty backpack, the one he used to store virtual supplies, was slung over his shoulder. Plus, he had an old hunting rifle that he had upgraded earlier when he was playing the game. "Okay, think, Jeff. Think," he muttered to himself, trying to calm his racing thoughts. He needed a plan, just like in the game. First, he had to find water and food. Then, he needed to figure out where he was and how to get out of this nightmare. He opened his backpack and found a few supplies: a water bottle, some canned food, a flashlight, and a knife. Jeff set off, moving cautiously through the desolate streets, alert for any signs of danger. As he explored, the reality of his situation began to sink in. He was truly in the world of Wasteland Warriors, and survival was now a real and terrifying prospect. Every noise made him jump. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. The game had been hard enough with a controller in his hand. Living it was another matter entirely. Jeff's first encounter with danger came sooner than he had hoped. He heard the distant rumble of an engine and quickly ducked behind a crumbling wall. Peering out, he saw a group of raiders on motorcycles, armed to the teeth and looking every bit as ruthless as they did in the game. He held his breath, praying they wouldn't see him. The raiders sped past, laughing and shouting, oblivious to his presence. Jeff let out a sigh of relief and continued on his way. He needed to find a safe place to hide and gather his thoughts. After hours of walking, Jeff came across an old gas station. It looked abandoned, but he knew better than to take anything for granted. He approached carefully, checking for traps or signs of life. The place seemed empty, so he slipped inside, barring the door behind him. Inside, he found a stash of supplies: bottled water, canned goods, and even a first aid kit. It felt like a stroke of luck, something rare in this harsh world. He settled down in a corner, eating some canned beans and trying to plan his next move. That night, as he lay on the cold floor, He couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak and groan of the old building set his nerves on edge. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by dreams of raiders and mutants. The next day, Jeff continued his journey, moving from one ruined building to the next, scavenging for anything useful. He encountered other survivors, some friendly, most not. Trust was a rare commodity in the Wasteland, and Jeff quickly learned to be wary of everyone he met. One afternoon, while searching an old supermarket, he stumbled upon a group of survivors in a heated argument with a band of raiders. Jeff hid behind an old shelf, watching as the confrontation escalated. The raiders demanded supplies, and when the survivors refused, violence erupted. Jeff's instinct was to run, but something made him stay. Even though he knew the survivors weren't real, he couldn't just stand by and watch them be slaughtered. Summoning his courage, he crept closer, gripping the hunting rifle tightly. As one of the raiders moved towards a young woman, Jeff lunged and cracked him in the head with the stock of the rifle. The raider fell to the ground. The other raiders turned and began to charge him. The remaining survivors, inspired by his bravery, fought back with renewed vigor. The fight was brutal and chaotic. Jeff managed to take down the raiders with the help of the survivors, but not without sustaining some injuries himself. He suffered a nasty cut to his left arm from one of the raiders' rusty knives. After the fight, only one raider was left. Realizing he was outnumbered, he fled, even dropping some supplies as he fled the supermarket. Breathing heavily, Jeff helped the young woman to her feet. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling. "I thought we were done for." "Name's Jeff," he replied, wincing as he touched the fresh cut on his arm. "Just doing what I could." The survivors introduced themselves. Sarah, the young woman, along with her brother Thomas and a few others. They were part of a small community trying to rebuild in the Wasteland. They invited Jeff to join them, and he accepted, grateful for the company and safety in numbers. Life in the community was hard but bearable. Jeff found himself taking on a leadership role, using his knowledge from the game to help with scavenging missions and defense strategies. He grew close to Sarah and Thomas, forming bonds that made the harsh world a little more bearable. But the Wasteland was relentless. Mutated animals, twisted by radiation, prowled the outskirts of their settlement. Jeff and the others had to constantly be on guard, setting traps and patrolling the perimeter. The creatures were unlike anything he had faced in the game, fiercer, more cunning. One night, the settlement was attacked by a pack of mutated wolves. The beasts were enormous, with glowing eyes and razor-sharp teeth. Despite their best efforts, the community suffered heavy losses. Jeff fought valiantly, using every trick he had learned, but the sheer number of wolves was overwhelming. Some members of the settlement were killed by the radiated demons of the night. In the chaos, Sarah was dragged away by one of the wolves. Jeff chased after her, his heart pounding. In the pursuit, he dropped his rifle. The only weapon he had was the knife on his hip. He found her in a clearing, the wolf standing over her. With a primal scream, he charged, plunging his knife into the beast's side. It let out a howl of pain before collapsing. Once the wolf took its final breath, and Jeff got back on his feet, he helped Sarah up. Both of them were covered in dirt and blood. "We need to get back," he said, his voice hoarse. They returned to the settlement, battered but alive. The attack had taken its toll, but the community was resilient. They buried their dead, tended to the wounded, and vowed to rebuild. Days turned into weeks, and Jeff adapted to his new life. The constant danger, the struggle for survival, it was all becoming routine. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. His memories of his old life were becoming hazy, as if they belonged to someone else. One evening, as the sun set over the desolate landscape, Jeff sat by a fire with Sarah and Thomas. They talked about their hopes for the future, dreaming of a world where they could live in peace. Jeff found himself wondering if he would ever see his old world again. That night, the settlement was not attacked. Jeff got a solid night's sleep for the first time since arriving at the settlement. The next morning, Jeff woke up in his bed, back in his apartment. For a moment, he was disoriented, his mind struggling to reconcile the vivid memories of the wasteland with the familiar surroundings of his room. He looked around, seeing the game console and TV still on, the controller lying on the floor. It was all a dream, Jeff said. Just a horrible dream. He sat up and checked his body for injuries, half expecting to find bruises and cuts, but there was nothing. He glanced at the clock. It was still early. The sun was just beginning to rise. He got out of bed and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street below. The world was peaceful, far removed from the horrors of the wasteland. The dream had felt so real, the fear and pain so tangible. It was a wake-up call, a reminder of how much time he had spent in front of a screen, losing himself in virtual worlds. Jeff thought about the people he had met in the dream, the bonds he had formed, and the dangers they had faced together. It made him realize how disconnected he had become from the real world. Jeff made a decision that morning. He vowed to spend less time gaming and more time living. He would reconnect with old friends, take up new hobbies, and maybe even find a way to help others, just like he had in the dream. He turned off his game console and was determined to make a change. The wasteland had been a nightmare, but it had also given him a new perspective on life. Jeff stepped outside, feeling the warm sun on his face. It was a new day, and he was ready to face it.